this is a period of enormous resistance to the future compared to all that is to come. It's the highest speed bump we have to surmount between here and my own peculiarly local form of the millennium, which is basically sometime in late 2012. Well, first of all, it's the dead of winter. It's not resistance. I should explain. My notion is that the world as we experience it is a struggle between two different kinds of forces. On the one side, habit, rather than resistance, or all these habit. And what is habit? It's what has come before. It's repetitious. It's predictable. It's entropic. It's recursive. It's iterative. And the other thing is novelty. And novelty is complexity, symmetry breaks, the improbable, the unusual, the unexpected, the unstable, the unusual. And so, you see, there is this ebb and flow, this tension between these two things in every moment. In the last 5 minutes, in the last 5 millennia, in the last 5 billion years, there has been a struggle between these two forces, and they can be mathematically portrayed, just like the rise and fall of temperature, or the rise and fall of a stock, or any other numerical quantity. They can theoretically be portrayed in this way. Well, then where we are now, if we think of habit as a rising of this imaginary Cartesian graph, and habit as a falling toward novelty, deeper into novelty, we say, a plunge into novelty, then where we are now is creeping along the highest edge of a plateau of habit, recidivism, constipation, conservatism, habitual thinking, so forth and so on, inevitably approaching a dramatic collapse in that style of behavior, caused by many different vectors coming together: climate, economy, politics, invention, technology, hormones, moon phases, ocean tides, cometary impacts, the spinning of the planet around the sun, so forth and so on. Time, as experienced, is very complex and rich and fractal and filled with anticipation and whatever the opposite of anticipation is, reconsideration, memory, regret, satisfaction. But the time that you get out of science is completely emotionless. It's like a skeletal map of time. It's featureless. Measurements are carried out without concern for where in the universal matrix they are made. So there's a schism between the scientific model of time and time as experienced, yeah. Well, I would partially agree with you and suggest that, yes, history is a series of forward movements and backward lurches, but over long periods of time, there is actually visible advance if we carefully enough define advance. I mean, it's not advance into cheerfulness or advance into universal progress and so forth and so on, but there is some kind of advance. History is, on one level, like in 1984, I can't remember the interrogator's name, says to Winston Smith, he says, if you want, what's his name? O'Brien says to Smith, if you want an image of human history, think of a boot kicking a human face forever. Well, that is that static image of history. I'm not that pessimistic. If you pull back to a scale of 25,000 years, history is an enormously creative rush out of the darkness toward the light. The fact that, so much blood and gore is spilled along the way is pause for thought. But if what is being birthed is novelty, then we seem to have hit the main vein of novelty. There was animal life for a very long time on this planet, and there was human intelligence for a very long time. I mean, people physically like you and I have been in existence for at least 150,000 years. That's, many, many times the duration of history. Those people had humor, drama, innuendo, rumor, gossip, hope, fear, loathing, so forth and so on. What they didn't have was technological expressions of their manas. They didn't download their minds into matter the way we do and have been doing for quite a while. And that's changed things. And to my mind, I guess I'm operating on the a priori assumption that novelty is to be cherished because I observe that nature cherishes novelty. Whenever you create a homogenate, whether chemical, social, religious, gaseous, whatever, it devolves into into some kind of aggregate of mixed types. Purity dissolves into complexity. The simple becomes the compound in all processes, in all times and places. So you said, isn't it always thus? And it is. But it hasn't always been described this way, especially in the West. I think probably this line comes closest in terms of a tradition to Taoism. I mean, after all, Taoism is about some all-pervading but invisible something, which is the first thing they tell you about it is it's hard to understand. And yet, somehow, it builds things up and it pulls things down according to its own mysterious inner dynamic. Well, surely what we're talking about here is time, but a different kind of time than the time of science, which doesn't build things up. It may pull things down. There is in science great genuflection to what is called the second law of thermodynamics, which is simply a law which says everything falls to pieces. The exception, which is never mentioned, is life itself. And the reason it's never mentioned is because to physicists, life is so uninteresting and peripheral that it can actually just be rounded out